When World War II ended, millions of men returned home to parades, medals, and promises of a new life. Yet for thousands of women who had also served, the nurses, radio operators, mechanics, and pilots who held the war together behind the front lines, the return to peace brought not honour, but silence. Many faced a question that would follow them for years. Why did men refuse to marry them? The answer wasn't about beauty, morality, or even patriotism. It was about fear of independence, trauma, and a shift in the gender order that the world wasn't ready to face. The war created a new kind of woman the post-war world couldn't understand. During those war years, women, they stepped into roles that were once truly unthinkable for their gender. They became mechanics in the Women's Army Corps, pilots in the Wasps, naval officers in the Waves, code breakers, and, battlefield nurses who worked under constant fire. These were not, I must say, the quiet homemakers society was used to. They were disciplined, decisive, and frankly had seen death up close. They could dismantle engines, deliver morphine under shell fire, and run logistics chains that really kept entire divisions alive. When peace returned, many of these women found that their strength and experience no longer fit the mould society had for them. Men returning from the front expected to reclaim their jobs, their authority, and, their place as providers. A woman who had worn a uniform, commanded troops, or saved lives in field hospitals was seen as admirable in wartime, but rather ironically threatening in peace. The very same qualities that made her absolutely indispensable during the war, those were suddenly seen as making her too independent once the conflict ended. Letters from the late 1940s, they actually reveal a rather chilling pattern if you look closely. Female veterans, they wrote about dates that, turned cold the moment men discovered they had served overseas. Some were told outright that, no man wanted a woman who could, handle herself like a soldier. Others were accused of having lost their femininity or of being, as they said, hardened. In the conservative social atmosphere that followed the war, these women became really victims of their own courage. Society rewarded male veterans, but quietly buried female ones. Governments celebrated male veterans with benefits, land grants, education programs, and public reverence. Meanwhile, female veterans often had to fight to even prove they had served. The United States didn't grant full veteran status to members of the Women's Air Force Service pilots, or WASPs, until 1977, more than 30 years after the war. Because their service wasn't recognized, they were left without the benefits that could have helped them rebuild their lives. Without housing support or access to the GI Bill, many were forced into low-paying jobs or back into domestic service. This economic imbalance deepened the cultural one. Men could now afford to build homes and families, while many women veterans were left struggling financially and socially. In post-war culture, marriage was seen as the cornerstone of stability. Yet a woman who had lived and worked among soldiers, or who had seen the horrors of the front, was often viewed with suspicion. There were unspoken fears, irrational but deeply rooted, that these women were, tainted by the war, either morally or emotionally. Some rumours even painted female nurses as too close to the men they treated, which was, honestly, a cruel distortion that reflected the discomfort society had with women who had lived outside traditional roles. Both male and female veterans carried trauma home from the war, but how that trauma was treated differed sharply. Men's battle fatigue was recognized as a cost of bravery. Women's emotional wounds were dismissed as weakness. Many female veterans were advised to, forget the war and return to normal life, as though they hadn't been the ones holding wounded soldiers' hands as they died. This created, an invisible barrier. Men struggling with their own trauma often felt threatened by women who had endured worse or, coped better. Relationships broke under the weight of unspoken experience. A man haunted by combat might drink in silence, while the woman beside him, who had worked through nights of bombardment, might stay composed and practical. Instead of comfort, this contrast bred resentment. Some men even confessed that marrying a female veteran felt wrong, as if the roles had reversed. She had been the protector, the medic, the one who kept order when chaos reigned. For men raised to see themselves as saviours, that reversal was intolerable. Society, really had no script for a marriage where the woman had been the one in command. Governments rather quickly shifted wartime propaganda from empowerment to domesticity. Posters that once showed women in uniform, now urged them back to the kitchen. The message was clear. The war was over, and so was their independence. Newspapers began publishing return to femininity pieces, urging women to give up uniforms and embrace motherhood. For those who refused, life could be harsh. Female veterans who stayed unmarried were often portrayed as, spinsters or odd women, their service quietly forgotten. Some tried to marry but found themselves, mismatched in a society that valued submission over partnership. One British nurse who had served through the Blitz wrote in her memoir that men could not look at me without seeing the war still in my eyes. In many ways, the rejection these women faced wasn't personal, it was structural. It was a reaction against change. The same post-war culture that gave rise to the baby boom also pushed back fiercely against the independence women had tasted during the war. Female veterans became symbols of a past. Everyone wanted to forget reminders that the cost of victory wasn't just paid by men on the battlefield, but also by women who lost their place in society to win it. The women who served in World War II broke ground that reshaped the future. Their skills in logistics, aviation and medicine opened doors for generations to come. Yet they paid a high personal price for being ahead of their time. You know, many never married, not because they were unloved, but because they refused to become smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Understanding this history really matters today because it reveals the hidden cost of progress. The freedom and equality modern societies enjoy were built on the sacrifices of people who were punished for defying old norms. The female veterans of the Second World War were among the first to prove that, well, courage truly knows no gender. Their stories remind us that independence once earned can't truly be erased, only buried. And every time we uncover these forgotten truths, we honour not just their service, but their refusal to surrender their dignity to the world's expectations. To learn more about the lost chapters of wartime history, those that changed societies but were written out of memory, subscribe to Echoes of Valour and share this story. Every forgotten veteran deserves to be remembered, not just for how they fought, but for how they lived after the battle was over.